urban geography constitute a diverse and rapidly developing field of geographical study. Although settlement studies have long formed a traditional branch of human geography, a great deal of progress has been made in recent years in refining and extending many of the earlier concepts. This growing interest in geography of towns and cities is probably a reflection of the fact that the majority of the population in the Western world lives in an urban environment, while those who do not are increasingly affected by the decisions, ideas and influences emanating from the main urban centers. Urban geography is concerned with the spatial aspects of cities, their location, growth and relationships both one with another and with their surrounding regions. It also embraces the internal patterns of cities in terms of land use, functional areas and social and cultural patterns. Another approach to the study of towns is what may be termed the ecological approach, which involves consideration of the relationship between the patterns and structure of urban society and the man-made city environment with its various neighborhoods and districts. On completion of this module, you would be able to understand what is a town and also understand the origin of the cities. So, coming to what is a town. Before examining some of the main fields of study in urban geography, we must pose the seemingly naive question, what is a town? In fact, the town defines simple definition. Is it a physical conglomeration of street and houses, or is it a center of exchange and commerce, or is it a kind of a society or even a frame of mind? Has it a certain size, a specific density? The difficulties in definition are countless and there is very little unanimity. It seems to be all things to all men. A variety of criteria is employed to define towns and cities for census purposes. We typically think of cities as being densely, but only a very small number of countries take into account population density in their definition. For example, in India, a town is officially defined as having a population over 5,000 and a density of over 400 persons per square kilometer, as well having over 75% of its adult population engaged in non-agriculture work. It is generally agreed that one of the distinguishing features of towns is that they are not primarily concerned with agriculture and food production. Despite this, few countries include in their definition any reference to function other than administration. It has been suggested that a more realistic definition of a town may be obtained by looking beyond these quantitative measures, and that a town or city is better defined by less tangible characteristics. It is implied that there are sociological differences between town and country. The motivation and processes involved in the establishment of the very first towns are largely a matter of speculation. A necessary precondition have been the existence of a prosperous, settled agriculture economy to enable the production of a large surplus of storable food to support a non-agricultural urban population. Freed from the work of food production, certain members of the population could thus engage in non-agricultural specialist trades. The earliest examples of true urban development are thought to have originated on the alluvial plains of the Tigris and Euphrates valleys in Mesopotamia between 5000 and 3000 DC. Various technological advances such as the invention of the wheeled cart, ox-drawn plough, sailing boat, systems of canal irrigation and the development of the arts of metallurgy all encouraged and made possible various changes in economic and social organization. Between 3000 and 2000 BC, urban settlement forms appeared for the first time in Eastern Europe. Various specialist crafts developed in these small urban centers and trade flourished in the Eastern Mediterranean region. During the 8th and 7th centuries BC, the Greek city states which had evolved on a Greek mainland extended their trading activities into the Western Mediterranean and founded a number of colonial settlements, notably at Cumae, Cyprus and Marseille. By 500 BC, urban settlements were to be found from the Atlantic coast of Spain to the Ganges Valley in India. At about this time, further technical advances took place, including improved ships, implements and weapons, and the introduction of coinage to facilitate trading. These developments indirectly influenced the rise of the Greek Empire, which in turn acted as a further stimulus to urban development. Existing trading centers flourished within the empire and new towns were founded to meet military, administrative and commercial needs. Nevertheless, revival of urban life in Europe took place only very slowly. Not until the 11th century was there a significant expansion in trade and industry. This was accompanied by rebuilding on the sites of many of the old Roman towns as well as the founding of certain new towns, often around the stronghold of a bishop or feudal lord, which offered protection to traders and craftsmen. By about 1400, the lands of Western, Southern and Central Europe, which were favorable for settlement, supported a large number of small urban settlements. An increase in the number of towns rather than a growth in individual town sizes were the distinguishing feature of urban development in the medieval period. With very few exceptions, towns remained small, generally containing no more than a few thousand inhabitants. The growth of medieval towns was restricted by problems of disease, sanitation, water supply and fire risk, but above all by the limits placed on the movement of food into the town from the surrounding area by means of simple and often inadequate forms of transport. It was not until the 16th century that a number of cities began to expand in size. Most were settlements occupying key locations for communications, trade and administration and tended to develop as capital cities or regional centers in the newly emerging nation states. By the 17th century, many of the major cities of Europe, the population has touched upon 1 lakh. Some of the notable cities like Paris, Amsterdam, Warsaw, London, Berlin, Moscow had larger urban population. The technical and economic changes which began with the Industrial Revolution has proved to be the most potent force affecting the development of the whole history of urbanization. The invention of steam powered machines was followed the large scale exploitation of coal fields and the creation of industrial towns on an unprecedented scale. At the same time, the improvements taking place in agriculture created an increased food surplus to support the growing urban population, and later in the 19th century, mechanization also made many agricultural workers redundant and encouraged them to see work in the new industrial centers. Improvements in transport, better roads, new canals and the development of the railways encouraged this mobility of population and also facilitated the movement of foodstuffs and industrial raw materials into the cities and allowed their products to be distributed to larger and more distant markets. Thus, industrialization and urbanization proceeded hand in hand throughout the 19th century. In Britain, industry was grafted onto long established towns, but on the coal fields, new industrial towns grew up with factories and workshops adjacent to endless streets of identical working class housing built to the minimum standards of late 19th century bylaws. Another outcome of technological change has to increase the limits placed upon the size of individual towns. Improvements in internal transport by suburban and underground railway systems, by the introduction of tram and bus services, and later by the widespread use of the private motor car have enabled people to live at progressively greater distances from their place of work. In recent decades, the growth of urban settlements has continued at a very high rate in many parts of the world. New towns are being created and large cities are becoming gigantic. In 1900, only 9.2% of the world's population lived in towns of over 20,000. This proportion had risen to 20.9% by 1950 and just over 30% by 1980, and it is expected to rise to 50% by 2040. Urban growth is in fact now taking place at a faster rate in the tropics than in either Western Europe or America. Despite this, the level of urbanization or proportion of urban dwellers to total population is still much lower than in the Western world. For the rural population in tropical regions is also continuing to, nevertheless, the growth in the absolute number of urban dwellers in tropical regions since about 1950 has been remarkable. In 2020, the current year, the number of million cities crossed 500 mark. Another effect of accelerated urban growth has been to cause cities to coalesce with neighboring towns to form a vast amorphous urban sprawl, to which the terms conurbation and metropolitan city have been applied in Britain and the USA respectively. The million city is small by comparison with these gigantic urban forms, some of which exceed 10 million inhabitants. The results of this type of agglomeration can be seen around capital cities such as London, Tokyo, New Delhi and New York, as well as in industrial areas such as the metropolitan counties of Greater Manchester, West Yorkshire and West Midlands in the UK, or the Ruhr district of West Germany. The growth of cities to excessive size creates many social and economic problems, including expensive and often inadequate housing, overcrowded roads, overburdened public transport systems and pollution by smoke, fumes and noise. These conditions in turn cause stress and tension among city dwellers and appear to be related to high levels of vandalism, delinquency and crime. Some even argue that the functioning of many large cities is in danger of breaking down and that the city as we know it today is disintegrating. Since the mid 19th century, there have been various reactions to the problems of excessive urban growth, notably the development of planned urban forms. The Western city has been the subject of intensive study and investigation, because its growth has been largely related to the impact of industrialization. It is frequently referred to as the industrial city. By contrast, the study of towns and cities in Africa, Asia and Latin America has been largely neglected. According to Soberg, society develops in three stages from the self-sufficient, pre-literate folk society have no urban settlement forms to the traditional agrarian society with limited technology and pre-industrial urban forms, and finally to the industrial, highly urbanized form of society. The pre-industrial city thus represents a stage is the evolution of the Western city. The pre-industrial city is a permanent settlement generally characterized by a very compact, high density arrangement of buildings which lacks any order or plan. Houses, workplaces, shops and other land uses are intermixed in an almost random manner. There is a general uniformity in the height and size of buildings which is broken only very occasionally by large institutional buildings such as a palace or religious center. An enclosing wall or ditch may serve the needs of defense. The main function of such settlement is the trading and exchange of goods, which is conducted from a marketplace near the town center. Manufacturing is limited to craft industries scattered throughout the town. However, in many instances, Western influences are making themselves felt, and in many parts of the developing world, the pre-industrial city is in a process of rapid change. Business sectors with offices and shops are being added to the traditional urban fabric, and modern roads are being developed to accommodate the newly motor car. In extreme cases such as Delhi, Lahore and Ibadan, a Western style city has been grafted onto a pre-industrial city, and two distinct urban cultures exist side by side. Another product of the accelerating urbanization process in the developing world is the shanty town. This is a district of temporary squatter dwellings fashioned out of scrap materials, generally overcrowded, lacking in amenities and characterized by a high incidence of disease, extreme poverty and exceptionally high mortality rates. The shanty town is a familiar and depressing feature of many cities in Latin America, Southeast Asia and Southern Africa. Whereas, in the Western city, slums are generally the product of age and decay. In the pre-industrial city, the shanty town is of recent origin and is the result of top rapid growth and a failure to provide adequate accommodation for those migrating to the growing urban centers. It will be evident that towns and cities vary enormously in terms of age, size, layout, function and population characteristics. It is not surprising, therefore, that geographers have tried to clarify and seek order in such a variety of urban types by attempting to classify towns and cities. Although various criteria have been employed for classification ranging from simple population size to types of geographical site, most systems of classification have been concerned with occupation structure. In other words, systems of functional classification have attracted most attention. Groups of towns with similar functional characteristics may be identified by the analysis of employment or occupation statistics. Specialization is to exist when employment in a particular category exceeds some normal level. For a more precise clarification, it is necessary to define what is meant by the normal level of employment in a given industry or group of activities. An early quantitative approach was devised by C.D. Harris in 1943 in an attempt to classify the towns and cities of the USA on the basis of employment statistics from the US Census of 1930. Harris distinguished mining, manufacturing, transport, wholesaling, retailing, university and resort or retirement cities, as well as what he termed diversified cities, which had high scores for a number of functions, but no single dominant function. A number of later studies have used as the value for comparison a figure for the average employment in a particular industry based on data for all towns. Working in this way, a town is regarded as specializing in a particular activity when its employment exceeds the national average. This approach has been extended by the use of standard deviation, whereby different classes of specialization are identified according to the degree of deviation above the mean. At the same time, there are certain objections to this method of classification. It has shown, for example, that the percentage of the total labor force in particular activities varies significantly with city size. The development of urban settlement forms requires a complex support system of transportation and external food supply. These conditions were first met in the Middle East, which may be regarded as the birthplace of urban civilization. The urban way of life spread from there to other parts of the world, but nowhere was it more widely adopted than in Europe. The Industrial Revolution extended the foundations for urban growth and initiated a period of dramatic urbanization in the Western world. As a consequence, many cities have grown to excessive size, creating persistent social and economic problems. During the present century, solutions to these problems have been sought in new planned urban